Welcome back to this presentation. However, it was a short-lived figurehead that sat on the throne next to Henry. While Catholics hoped to have their religion restored, they saw that Catherine Howard was a flighty teenager, accused of premarital contracts before becoming queen, and then adultery. Weir, 1991, White, 2001. Convicted of treason, Catherine, along with her accused lovers, was sentenced to death. She was executed by beheading behind the Tower walls on February 13, 1542, and with it, the hope of the Catholic Church being restored, for Mary, Henry's daughter and dangerously still a Catholic, had no chance for the throne. Weir, 1991. The Reformed religion in England seemed to keep sway, especially after Henry's last marriage. In 1543, Henry VIII married Catherine Parr, an intelligent, learned woman, a patroness of humanists and a secret Protestant. Weir, 1996. In turn, not only was she maternal, but willing to be a student of the Reformed faith and to turn Henry's head completely from all Catholic beliefs. White, 2001. The two discussed theology together, especially when Henry was ill, but the dangerous talks were drawing too much attention. The Catholic factions, still recovering from Catherine Howard's fall, turned quickly to Catherine Parr and were intent on ruining her. Weir, 1991, White, 2001. Headed by Bishop Stephen Gardiner, the Catholics in Henry's court used her love of Reformed learning and Henry's paranoia to draw up a warrant for her arrest. White, 2001. Luckily, Catherine was given notice of the warrant by an unknown person and was able to effect arrest and certain death. Weir, 1991, White, 2001. However, the sphere of politics was about to change, especially at this time and her close shave with death. Although Henry had kept up with a conservative middle ground religiously, his politics reflected upon what he felt God was telling him to do. Clark, 2001. His suspicions slowly grew, and he thought enemies were everywhere, especially in the great misfortune of wives he had. White, 2001. A few years after Cromwell ordered English to be the main language for the English Church, Henry was feeling that the common man was making fun of God in the alehouses, wishing to turn his church back to what the Catholic Church had been, but without staying with Rome. Weir, 1991. While he partially succeeded, a new regime was growing, and one that he was dreading, but did not care passed into the next reign. When Henry VIII died, on January 27, 1547, his son, now titled Edward VI, was crowned king at the age of 10, and his daughters reinstated to the line of succession. Weir, 1996. On his Regency Council, men who rose in his father's reign were elected to positions of power, with his uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, as protector, but all were Protestant. Weir, 1996. Indeed, Edward's government was the first to promote Protestantism as the country's religion, outlawing Catholicism, even in the case of Mary, Edward's older sister. Weir, 1996. In March of 1549, Parliament passed a new Act of Uniformity, in which it was decreed that the services in Arch Cranmer's Book of Common Prayer were to be used in all churches, but that anybody who practiced the Catholic faith would be fined and then jailed if not obedient. Weir, 1996. All were forced to comply with the act with no exceptions. Although Mary had been arguing with Edward in his council about practicing her faith, as well as stating that Edward was too young to make religious decisions, there had been riots when the act was enforced. Weir, 1996. Concern was expressed in the council chamber that the Lady Mary might have been encouraging the rebels. After all, she was at her house in Kenninghall at the time, in the heart of rebel territory, and only 20 miles from Norwich, where most of the populace was gathering for rebellion. Weir, 1996. Although Mary was personally not involved in rebellion, she was made a target of agitation for Edward's regime and would fight until she herself came to the throne. Otherwise, it had been easy for England to accept the new laws. Although hard economic times were approaching, all had been united in being free of the greed and commercialism which seemed to be the predominating motive in the new reign. Reed, 1964. According to Reed, 1964, with the exception of foreign trade, medieval industrialism and commercial arrangements designed for an urban or at most a national economy were breaking down. The democratic ideals of the craft guilds were giving way to sharp distinctions between employer and employee, capital and labor. Old forms remained, old laws remained, but the forms and the laws were no longer consonant with the operating productive forces of the land, and so no longer applicable, in a large measure no longer applied. Page 109. It was easy in the young king's reign to have those advisers rule in his name until he became of age and ignore these growing troubles. However, with the rise of Protestantism, reformers promised a utopia, much as Thomas More had written, but could not keep their impossible promises without having to return to a corrupt system that most were familiar with, but they did not want. Reed, 1964. In fact, without the religious fervor, Protestantism almost became a profiteering exercise in Edward's reign, with the nobles grabbing land, and using clerical lands to assist in elevating those of the religious vocation. Reed, 1964, Weir, 1996. Many of those in religious vocation were not very saintly either. However, this practice did not last. After Somerset was executed in 1550 on charges of treason, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, gained the title of Protector, even if it was not formally announced. Weir, 1996. While scheming and ambitious, Northumberland erased the most corrupt and re-established royal authority, but he had his own plans, especially when Edward became fatally ill in 1553. Weir, 1996. Not only were he and Edward fearful of Mary succeeding and undoing the Protestantism that had been instituted. Northumberland cornered Edward into agreeing to disown his sisters, Mary and Elizabeth, as they had been declared illegitimate by Henry, and to name his second cousin, the Protestant and unknown Lady Jane Grey, the granddaughter of Henry's sister Mary, as his heir. Weir, 1996. To keep himself close to the throne and to assure that he would still have power, Northumberland married his son, Guilford, to Jane Grey in the spring of 1553. Weir, 1996. Jane Grey had been part of an obscure faction of Henry's family. Born in October of 1537, the daughter of Francis Brandon, Henry Grey, the former the daughter of Mary Tudor, Henry's younger sister, Jane had grown up preferring academics over leisure, and is said to have been beaten more often than other children of the era. Weir, 1996. By the time of Henry's death in 1547, Jane was an established Protestant, first living with Catherine Parr before her untimely death in 1548, and then finishing her education with her parents. Weir, 1996. By 1553, she was unknowingly used in the royal chessboard by Northumberland, first step being marrying Guilford, which she did unwillingly. Weir, 1996. When Edward died on July 6, 1553, Northumberland acted quickly in ensuring that Jane and Guilford would take the throne. Weir, 1996. Before Mary could be announced as Queen of England, Northumberland secured the Tower of London, and proceeded to keep news of Edward's death a secret until the time in which Jane was secure. Weir, 1996. Placing Jane in the Tower, he waited to announce the news of her ascension and then Edward's death, but that plan fell apart 9 days later, when support for Mary grew, instead of the unknown Jane, and the former was announced queen. Weir, 1996. All who had mainly been involved in the coup, including Jane and Guilford, were placed under arrest in the Tower. The keeping of the Protestant religion in England had failed, and Catholicism was on its way to being in control once more. Indeed, that was Mary's intention. Denied of her birthright until then, she set about turning out the Protestant religion, allowing Catholicism back and taking revenge upon those who had hurt her in the past. Read 1964, Weir 1996. Mary was later nicknamed Bloody Mary for the persecution of Protestants and other non-Catholics while she reigned England, and it was most unfairly, as she is the most merciful of all Tudor rulers. Read 1964. At the beginning of her reign, other than asserting England back to Rome, Mary had only executed Northumberland, but was going to spare Jane and Guilford, even though a trial had found them guilty of treason. But when the revolt started again, Mary began to worry. Weir, 1996. She also had her eye on Philip, Charles V's son, aiming to marry him. Weir, 1996. When this was announced, Henry Grey and Thomas Wyatt, the poet's son, headed a revolt in Jane's name, also intent on preventing the Spanish marriage. Read, 1964, Weir, 1996. Faced with this, as well as the Spanish ambassador hinting that the marriage agreement might be cancelled, Mary had Jane and her father and husband executed in February 1554. Weir, 1996. Even after Mary married Philip amidst unpopular whisperings, the burning of heretics began. Cranmer, even though he had recanted his Protestant faith, was one of the first to be burned. Weir, 1996. While Parliament members begged for Mary's forgiveness, they passed heresy laws. One of them was an act for the renewing of 3 statutes made for the punishment of heretics, giving bishops who were in favor of the act being passed the power to investigate cases of suspected heresy, and provided the Church to hand over those found guilty to secular authorities for burning at the stake. Weir, 1996. All lands were automatically given to Mary when condemned. Weir, 1996. In this case, Mary's cause was more religious than political, more personal than practical. She truly believed that it was her duty as a sovereign to make the heretics suffer a foretaste of hellfire in this world, wishing that they could be saved. Weir, 1996. She reversed her father's parliamentary decision and made her parents' marriage illegal, truly making her sister Elizabeth illegitimate. Weir, 1996. Worse, she constantly imprisoned her sister, paranoid that she was plotting against her and trying to usurp her place as Philip's wife, just as Anne Boleyn had done to Catherine of Aragon many years before. Dunn, 2005. Reed, 1964. Weir, 1996. In truth, other than these truly misguided actions, results from her horrid past, Mary was described as a kind mistress, truly happy that her changes had brought back the past she remembered and cherished. Weir, 1996. She was truly intent on keeping Catholicism in England and trying to zone her sister, the more Protestant-leaning Elizabeth. However, Mary, by the time she married Philip in 1554, was 38 years old and unable to have children. Weir, 1996. Although 2 phantom pregnancies in 1554 and 1558 ended in embarrassment, Mary admitted that Elizabeth was her only heir, still leaving a disputed succession, a bankrupt country, and war losses by the time of her death on November 17, 1558. Dunn, 2005. Weir, 1996. On the same day Mary had died, Elizabeth was announced Queen of England, but there had been more pressing issues than her being considered a bastard. Dunn, 2005. Weir, 1998. Indeed, Elizabeth's suspected leanings toward Protestantism made her a more vulnerable target for ambitious foreign princes, and disloyal Englishmen were designed on the throne. Weir, 1998. However, under the wise counsel of men who had stayed with her for most of her life, as well as loyal men who flourished at her court, Elizabeth kept England under her thumb, even as foreign invasion and Catholic assassination threats surrounded her daily. Weir, 1998. Although Elizabeth was an unabashed Protestant, displayed on her first Christmas as queen when leading a Catholic mass, she sought the middle ground between the 2 religions, although she had been as equally guilty in burning Catholics. Weir, 1998. Although accused also of being an atheist, since she supported no fanatical side, She could not tolerate the mysticism of Catholicism nor the preaching sermons of Protestantism, but believed that there could be only one head of the Church of England, and that was the monarch. Weir, 1998. Like Cromwell before her, Elizabeth instructed that all religious matters be in English, but had retained some rituals of Catholicism, such as unmarried clergy, crucifixes and candles, and a strict dress code for priests and nuns. Weir, 1998. Even if she had burned Catholics at the stake for political reasons and enforced strict laws against them, Elizabeth showed no antipathy towards them and had welcomed them into her court, employing many writers, musicians, and artists. Weir, 1998. However, she still accepted her father's break with Rome and had continued the course, facing excommunication from popes and threats of Catholic powers destroying England, just as the Spanish Armada attempted to do in 1587 and subsequent years before her death in 1603. Reed, 1964. Weir, 1998. Much like Henry VIII, Elizabeth felt that the middle ground was neutral, and in doing away with the idolatry that she sought to release her subjects from, assisted in ushering England into the golden age that her father had promised over 50 years before. Before her death in 1603, Elizabeth had pleased none religiously or politically, but had kept England stable. Although she was considered a great queen, Reed, 1964, explained that her greatness was not of any conventional pattern. She was not a great leader of her people, but she was a wise and careful guardian of them, with a sure instinct for their real interests. Lytton Statuary had put the matter in a nutshell. The fierce old hen sat still, brooding over the English nation, whose pullulating energies were coming swiftly to ripeness in unity under her wings. She sat still, but every feather bristled. She was tremendously alive. Pages 249 to 250. Elizabeth kept the peace in England, never allowing her country to go deeply into debt with war as other members of the dynasty had, and had used that to allow the arts and literature to flourish. While avoiding great commitments and keeping her advisers, as well as her people, guessing as to her intentions, Elizabeth, after 44 years, sat firmly on the throne with the popularity of people and government behind her, never marrying and claiming Englishmen to be her children. Reed, 1964. While religion and politics had barely been her central concern, as Mary's had been, she reinserted her royal authority in protecting England, although she had been called illegitimate her whole life and her throne was threatened. Dunn, 2005. Reed, 1964. Weir, 1998. When James VI, great-grandson of Margaret Tudor, Henry's older sister, claimed the throne after Elizabeth's death, he continued the same pattern of reform Elizabeth had instigated when she herself took the throne many years before. Dunn, 2005. Although most had placed the English Reformation as a mostly religious movement, it had to those concerning stability. Initially, it had ties to Henry VIII, who broke with the Roman Catholic Church to establish his own church, and to marry Anne Boleyn in order to have a male heir. Clark, 2001. Weir, 1991. Additionally, those close to the king had an eye on the riches the church had in England and sought to destroy them in order to enrich themselves through the buying and selling of lands, items, and relics. Weir, 1991. Furthermore, as Henry became a much-married monarch, family members and friends close to their wives swayed him to what side of the religious spectrum he should direct his policies to. Finally, as Henry's heirs each had their turn as ruler of England, each had used their experiences to form the policies and to put England to a more conservative or liberal direction. Weir, 1996. Therefore, this presentation suggests that the English Reformation was more political than religious because of Henry VIII's break with the Roman Catholic Church and the changes in government policies during his reign and those of his heirs. McKay, 2014, Weir, 1991, and Weir, 1996. Okay. Okay, in addition to this presentation, we do have a dialogue, although it's pretty small. It does show that the complex family tree of the Tudors and how succession was an issue, just as it had been before Henry's time. Okay, here's the top, if we can get a little bit closer here. Highlighted in orange are the Tudor rulers, starting with Henry VII and going down to Henry VIII, ultimately his children and his grandniece Jane Grey, highlighted in orange. The ones highlighted in pink are the Scottish rulers, the bottom being James VI of Scotland, who is also James I of England, who claimed the throne after Elizabeth's first death in 1603.